Right, we expect a few more incomings and outgoings, especially at Chelsea over the next few days. Let's get to Arsenal, though. They want over £30 million for Eddie Nketiah as talks continue with Nottingham Forest for the striker. First of all, from the player's point of view, do you think this is a good move for him? Is it the right time for him now to go somewhere else, seek pastures new, get some more minutes under his belt?
Yeah, it feels like that, doesn't it? I think, for Arsenal, for the player as well, he's not really been able to get consistent game time for Eddie Nketiah. And as you mentioned, I think at this point in his career, he needs to be really starting every week. I think the question is that Nottingham Forest when they have two strikers already in Chris Wood and Taiwo Winnie?
I mean, they've had injury problems, those two players. I think Nketiah will probably back himself to get in the team above those players. He'll have a big belief in what he can do. And I think Nketiah, what's been missing from his career so far is that consistent game time. You can't be consistent when you're playing 20 minutes here, 60 minutes there, not coming off the bench for a few games. He isn't going to get the minutes that he needs at Arsenal, so he needs to go somewhere. Forest is a good environment. You've been there plenty of times. I've been there a few times as well. Forest is a good club. I think he can go there and kind of kickstart his career a little bit. I think that's what he needs. He's almost got lost in Arsenal. I think when he signed his contract, Arsenal weren't the beast that they are now. And over the years, they've almost kind of gone beyond Nketiah's current level. I'm not saying he could never get to that level, but at the moment, I don't think he's quite there to be a striker for a team that's challenging for the title. And I think in some ways, if Nketiah can take a backward step at Forest, it may enable him to go forwards later on in his career.
Just a question, but if he comes into Forest with Wood and Awoniyi there, if they both stay, is he number one? Does he go in as number one?
I think it's a different option for Nuno Espirito Santo and probably just allows him to be a bit more flexible week to week. I think you look at Chris Wood, he's very underrated, I think, last season. 14 goals in the Premier League, another double-digit season for him. You mentioned Taiwo Winnie, he struggled with a groin injury last season. So I think letting him work back into the season on his fitness, I don't think is a bad thing. I think with Eddie Nketiah, you have a different profile of a striker, someone who can run in behind. Also maybe link a bit differently with likes of Morgan Gibbs-White, Callum Hudson-Odoi, who he'll know very well from the England underage groups as well. Yeah. Anthony Elanga as well off the other wing. So I think, that actually as a front four, there's a lot of speed there, there's a lot of creativity, and also it's just a bit of a different attack compared to if you would have had Taiwo Winnie or Chris Wood there. So I think that's something Nuno Espirito Santo has been looking for. I think Nottingham Forest are also potentially looking at the Feyenoord striker, Santiago Jimenez as well. So it definitely looks like they're looking for that extra number 9. We'll just see in the last week of the window again, what are they going to do about it?
OK, well, that could be one out of Arsenal. One coming in could be Mikel Merino, because Arsenal remain in talks with Real Sociedad over signing the midfielder. It's thought the clubs are finalising the payment structure and the makeup of the performance-related add-ons. Dan, I keep hearing Arsenal have had a good window in comparison to their two main competitors, Man City and Liverpool, who've been very dormant in this window. But they've only made one big signing, right? Ricardo Calafiori, defender in an area where they're very strong already. Do you think Arsenal need to make one more big or decent signing for it to really be considered a successful window?
I think it's tough to... We've just sat here and absolutely lambasted Chelsea. And then I think it's very difficult to then come and question what Arsenal are doing when we've seen how they've grown over the last 2 or 3 years, how they've improved upon year. They've got better and better to become... I think they are... I know they've not won anything, but I think Arsenal are an elite team now. I think Calafiori obviously came off the back of a brilliant international tournament. He gives them the natural left-footed option at left-back. So you could argue that, yes, they were well started at full-back, but he's something different, perhaps something that they need if they want to build up as a back three. He can tuck in. He's a very versatile left-back that can do different things. I think they still need that midfield player, and that's what Merino is, someone who could come in. Partey might not be able to play every week. I think Arsenal were at their best last season when they had Partey, Rice and Ødegaard. They obviously started the season very well. They've got Jorginho there as well, but I think they just need that other option so that they can be a bit more flexible game to game, have different teams for different competitions like Champions League, Premier League. I think he'd make Arsenal stronger. I think he could play multiple roles in that midfield. If they get him in, I don't see that only signing 2 players has been a problem for Arsenal, because I think they're building in the right way. And I do think the proof's in the pudding, and I think the club has now, over the last few years, earned enough trust for the fans to think, yeah, these guys know what they're doing.
One of the stories that you might be keeping up with is this one, because Wolves are in talks with Arsenal over the signing of goalkeeper Aaron Ramsdale. They're exploring a loan with an option to buy. Arsenal, though, want to do a permanent deal, or at least a loan that comes with an obligation to buy. Ajax remain interested in Ramsdale. They had a loan offer rejected earlier this month, and Arsenal are working on potential replacements if Ramsdale was to leave. They've explored the conditions of a deal for Espanyol's Juan Garcia. Right, this is interesting, isn't it? First of all, from Wolves' point of view, they've got a settled number one, Jose Sarr. So Ramsdale's only going to go there if he's going to be number one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting when you look at Wolves because, of course, this window, they've recouped over £90 million, signing their captain, Maximilian Kilman, and also Pedro Neto going to Chelsea. And I think the question around Wolves has been how are they going to invest some or a lot of that money that they've recouped. You look at Jose Sarr, he's been their number one for the last 3-4 seasons. I think over the last 12 months, it's fair to say he has been linked with moves away from the club. Whether there's been any kind of concrete evidence of that, we'll wait and see. But I think when you look at Wolves' squad, would you have said maybe a number one is what they would be looking for immediately? I think Gary O'Neill will be looking at centre-back and also midfield to beef up that squad. But is Aaron Ramsdale an upgrade on Jose Sarr? On balance, you would say yes. And I also think perhaps another consideration is, I think Gary O'Neill's looking to play a back four this season, and maybe Aaron Ramsdale, especially with how good he is with his feet, perhaps gives them a bit more ability to play out from the back and perhaps change their style of play. We saw last season they played a lot of counter-attacking football with pace. I think they're going to try and transition that this season if they can. I think Aaron Ramsdale will really help them do that.
Yeah, I think if you look at it from Ramsdale's point of view, he definitely needs a move somewhere. And I think if he's guaranteed to go to Wolves and be number one, he probably jumps at that chance, doesn't he? Because he's had a wasted season, essentially a season that probably would have taken him by surprise. I don't think he would have expected at the start of last season to be ousted from number one and Arsenal to have brought in a goalkeeper of the calibre of David Raya. And in fairness, we all debated whether the two number ones thing could work. I think from Arsenal's perspective, they've upgraded with David Raya. But you can't just keep having Ramsdale on the bench season after season. He's too good a goalkeeper and a goalkeeper that's an England international and will have eyes on being England's number one at some point. So I agree with you in the fact that from a Wolves perspective, I would say I would have thought they would have had other priorities. But what you've said about the switch of system, and Gary O'Neill's a very intelligent manager, he'll know that he's lost some big players over the last few years, and if he thinks if changing goalkeeper can change maybe the way that Wolves play and maybe get those extra 2-3% out of the team, he'll do it. But he'll only do it. That Arsenal will only accept that if it's an obligation to buy.
Would Wolves not be falling into a similar trap to what Arsenal were in, though? In that if they keep Sarr, you've got two number ones there.
I mean, I'm sure, Gary O'Neill and Matt Hobbs, the technical director, sporting director at Wolves, they've talked all summer about planning for moves that have happened. So when Kilman was sold, they were planning ahead of that. When Neto was sold as well. So I think this Ramsdale news will only be with the view that they have a plan for Jose Sarr, whether that's to contend for the number one jersey or they know that Jose Sarr could be potentially on the way out. We'll wait and see. But if this happens, I mean, what a statement signing from Wolves. I mean, I don't think there's probably been a signing like this, if it does happen, for Wolves fans to be this excited about for a long time, I think.
I think Wolves have got an excellent goalkeeping coach, Neil Cutler, as well, who was previously at Villa, and I saw firsthand what he did for Emi Martinez. Look at what Emi Martinez did with Neil Cutler as a goalkeeper coach. Neil Cutler improves goalkeepers, and maybe it's the fact that Ramsdale's maybe a little bit more malleable than Jose Sarr. They're at kind of different points in their career, aren't they? So I think that's a goalkeeper that I think Neil Cutler would work very well with, the goalkeeping coach.
A number of European clubs are exploring a potential deal for forward Jadon Sancho. As it stands, he will stay at United, but this new interest makes Sancho definitely one to watch in the final 10 days of the window. Dan, given the history with Erik ten Hag, with the club, do you think a move, if one comes up, a move to a big European club would make the most sense for him?
I think regardless, once the window closes, I think that can be really the next chapter for Jadon Sancho, whether that's at Manchester United or another club, because while the window's open, it is quite easy to have this narrative around what happened with Ten Hag last season, and of course he was so good at Borussia Dortmund in spells last season as well, whereas when the window closes, at least he can finally move on. Whether that's at United with the 4 other wingers who were there, the likes of Marcus Rashford, Alejandro Garnacho, Anthony Ahmad as well. But he can also play in the false 9 position. So there definitely is space for him at United. I think the question is who is out there in Europe who really needs that winger. You know, you look at PSG, they signed someone in this week, so they've potentially cooled their interest in Sancho. You look who else is out there in Europe. There doesn't seem a natural fit at the moment. So I think he's best off trying to get his way back into that United side. And I think there'd be nothing more than the fans at Old Trafford wanting to see Sancho succeed. It's just whether he's given the opportunity and whether he can really work his way into the system, I think.
I just can't see where he fits at the moment. It's good that they buried the hatchet and that he's not training with the kids and not allowed into the complex, things like that. Nobody wants to see stuff like that happening. But there's a lot of barriers to him getting into that Manchester United team. We saw he wasn't in the squad on Friday. Obviously, that was a little bit to do with illness. Now he's out that squad. So for him to get back in, someone's got to come out, and I don't see who that is. And people are talking about like the false 9 position as a fail-safe. Manchester United have got 2 recognised centre forwards now that will want game time. I don't really see that as a viable option. The right-hand side looks like Ahmed's really made a play for that position to make that his own. They've got Anthony, who cost a lot of money there as well. On the other side, you've got Rashford and Garnacho, both their best football side. So I think probably rules that position out. Number 10, Fernandes and Mount. So I don't, although we're saying Sancho can play in all these positions, I don't see at Manchester United when he's going to play in those positions with all those options.
Why do you think there's been no Premier League clubs associated with him in the last few days? We're just hearing that there might be some interest from European clubs.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the interesting thing is, it's what does Jadon Sancho want? You know, does he want to be playing football, which you would imagine wants to play every week? But then you look at the other clubs in the Premier League, you know, unless you looked at Arsenal, for example, you know, they're very settled with the likes of Trossard, Saka, Martinelli. Tottenham have a wealth of wingers as well, likewise in Manchester City. So it doesn't seem that, you know, Jadon Sancho will want to be playing, you know, the highest level possible, European football. And I think when you look in the Premier League, there's maybe, I mean, you might say Aston Villa, but maybe there's not perhaps a natural fit, and maybe he's best off just working his way into that United side. Strength and depth. These teams are now playing over 60 games a season. You know, I think we need to get away from, you know, 2-3 players enough. These teams need strength and depth, and he'll get opportunities this season, I think.
I guess wage and transfer fee would be the barriers for Premier League clubs, but then we know that the Premier League's the league that carries the most amount of money. So if it's a barrier for Premier League clubs, probably going to be a barrier for clubs outside of the Premier League as well. I think in an ideal world, he probably would have moved to Dortmund, but Dortmund, although they facilitated the loan deal in the second half of last season, the way they operate as a club fundamentally, they're not going to pay the kind of transfer fee that Sancho is going to command, and they're not going to be able to afford the wages. So again, it kind of leaves a player stuck, because I think the ideal place for him to play his football now would be Dortmund, because we saw what he did in the Champions League last season.
OK, in terms of midfield, Man United have been looking for a midfielder for much of this window, and Manuel Ugarte remains a live option. Talks continue with Paris Saint-Germain over his signing. As it stands, Scott McTominay will remain at Old Trafford, and as a result, Manchester United may have to be creative when it comes to potential incomings. I mean, we've spoken about midfielders, central midfielders in Man United for the last couple of weeks, and the fact that we've come up with so many different names, I mean, now it seems like Ugarte is in pole position. He's the one they've zeroed in on. But the fact that we've mentioned so many names, does that suggest that there isn't an obvious option to improve the midfield?
Yeah, I think it depends what angle you look at this, because actually you could look at maybe half cup full in terms of actually Manchester United under Ineos. I think when you've looked at who they've signed this year, they really have had alternative options for each signing they've made, which actually, perhaps compared to previous windows, they've had one target and pursued that one target all window. So I think actually having different options for midfield could be positive. I think Ugarte would make a lot of sense. He's a bit younger. They need a number 6, I think, to really give Mainu a bit of a break, but also rotate in and out with Casemiro as well. So I think he would be a natural fit. He's tenacious, he can play with the ball, and he's happy to put a tackle in as well. So perhaps it just alleviates the pressure off Casemiro a little bit, and also doesn't put as much pressure on Mainu as well at just 19 years old.
Dare I ask the question, Carve? Any more incomings at Chelsea?
Yeah, I think there will be. I think
Okay.
once Chelsea complete a deal for João Felix, they will focus on trying to sign a new striker, a new number 9. I think they accept that is what Enzo Maresca needs, and that was obvious watching the game against Manchester City on Sunday. Chelsea needs somebody like Erling Haaland. Okay, you're not going to get somebody as good as him, but they need somebody in that mould. Kind of player they've had in the past.
Didier Drogba.
Diego Costa. You know, Chelsea.
I loved Didier Drogba. Just putting it out there. I loved him.
They need somebody with a bit of personality, a character, with a bit of physicality.
Fear.
Yeah, you know, somebody who scores a lot of goals, somebody the fans can connect with. Now, somebody who ticks a lot of those boxes is the African Player of the Year, Victor Osimhen. We know he's been frozen out at Napoli. We know he wants to leave. We know Napoli are open to selling him. We also know that Chelsea are interested in signing him. But the latest information we have today is that Chelsea will not be signing him on a permanent deal as things stand. So Chelsea potentially only interested in a loan deal, but we already know that the player and his representatives are not interested in him going out on loan. They're saying if he's to leave Napoli, it has to be on a permanent deal. But I don't think Chelsea want to do a permanent deal at the moment because of the size of the transfer fee and also his wages. And the same goes for PSG as well. Every time people talk about Victor Osimhen, they go, yeah, he's going to leave Napoli, he's going to go to Chelsea or PSG. Well, PSG held talks about signing him earlier this summer, but they've moved on. They've signed other players. They've spent about 150 million euros, players in other positions. And I think they looked at Osimhen. I'm not sure Luis Enrique looked at him and said he's my top target as a forward. And also the overall size of the package, again, was too much for them. And Napoli are pretty difficult, maybe, to negotiate with.
Okay.
And that is not a criticism, because their president, Mr. De Laurentiis...
They're tough, are they?
They're tough. He always defends Napoli. He does what's in Napoli's interest. So I think for those reasons that I've just gone through, PSG and Chelsea would like him, but not for the numbers being quoted. I think Chelsea definitely would like to take him on loan, but we have to wait until we get closer to the deadline to see what Chelsea and Napoli can negotiate, if in fact they do negotiate something. And also we know that Romelu Lukaku is pretty close to moving in the opposite direction to Napoli as well.
Hi there, welcome back to Transfer Talk. We're going to speak to French football expert now. Jonathan Johnson is in Paris for us. Hi Jonathan, thanks very much for having a chat. Let's get right into it. We've just been talking about Manuel Ugarte. We seem to have been talking about him for most of the month in terms of possibly going to Manchester United. Is there growing optimism now that a deal can be done between PSG and Man U?
Well, certainly there's still a feeling that PSG can and will let Ugarte go if a deal can possibly be reached with United. The main stumbling block this summer has been the fact that the two clubs' valuation of the player, it has been quite some way apart. But Ugarte wasn't involved in PSG's opening game of the season last week, so there is still a feeling that he is one of the players that the French champions will look to move on before the end of this transfer window. Obviously, a player that United remain interested in, and the dialogue has never really broken up between United and PSG this summer, given PSG's interest in Jadon Sancho as well.
Hi, Jonathan. Afternoon. Just on the theme of Manchester United, I mean, do PSG still want Jadon Sancho, or do you think they'll be looking elsewhere, or do you think they'll be happy with their squad?
I think the situation has changed a little bit after the opening game of the season. Gonzalo Ramos picking up an injury that's probably going to keep him out for a couple of months as opposed to a couple of weeks. And that now has prompted a bit of a rejig in terms of PSG's thinking. Are they still interested in Jadon Sancho's profile? Yes, he's a player they identified at the beginning of the summer who could possibly, fill their needs in the squad, and give them a real sort of right-sided presence in the attack. However, with this injury to Ramos, that means that there's no real possibility of moving Randall Colomwani on between now and the end of the transfer window, so they'll stick with him in the middle and now possibly look for somebody who might be a little more complementary. So the name Ademola Lookman of Atalanta has surfaced in recent days, and there's now speculation that he perhaps has moved slightly ahead of Sancho in PSG's pecking order.
Hi, Jonathan. Sticking with PSG, Carlos Soler is in talks with, West Ham are in talks with PSG to sign Carlos Soler at the moment. What would he bring to their midfield? They've obviously, improved their midfield already this summer. Where would he fit into West Ham?
Yeah, Soler's a really interesting one because he's got quite a versatile profile. He's certainly played a number of positions since he joined PSG a couple of years ago. Unused substitute last week in PSG's opening game, but he did make the matchday squad. So I think there is a feeling that Luis Enrique could still use if he doesn't end up doing. However, Soler, in terms of what was expected from him at the very beginning of his time with PSG, I think many people expected him to be a very creative presence. He's been a bit more workmanlike than that, but that's also because of the way that he's been deployed by a number of different coaches. And I think West Ham would be getting somebody who is potentially a very creative player, if everybody remembers him at his best in Valencia back in La Liga. A really superb player, and many people felt that PSG were getting an absolute bargain back then. And although he has proved to be decent value in the fact that he could fit in a number of different positions, whether it's a more central midfield role, whether it's even a fullback or wingback at times, he is somebody who has added value to the squad. So I think the Hammers will be getting a very interesting type of player who could potentially fill a number of needs.
Moving on to Everton, there are reports linking Neil Maupay with a move away. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, bad news for Marseille with a serious injury in the attacking ranks to Moubandia. So that means that Marseille will now be looking to make an attacking reinforcement. And Maupay has been sort of suggested as a bit of a low-cost approach, given that this has been quite a busy transfer window for Marseille so far. But they hit the ground running under Roberto De Zerbi in their opening game, really blowing out last season's surprise package Brest. And there has also been speculation that they're making a move on Norwich's Jonathan Rowe. That speculation isn't anything new. It's been around for a couple of weeks now, and it feels like Rowe is perhaps the main priority for Marseille at this moment in time, with Maupay possibly being the player that they pivot to if it continues to be problematic for the Norwich man.
Jonathan, we saw Tottenham in action last night, first Monday night football of the season. Just wondering, with a few weeks left to go of the window, could there be one more incoming, do you think, for Spurs?
Yeah, there's a name that's certainly started to surface over here in France, and that's Monaco's Van der Sar, primarily a right-back, right-wing-back. So definitely one to watch between now and the end of the window. Whether or not Monaco would feel that they can move him on and potentially move for somebody else to sort of fill in, that remains to be seen. But he's definitely a player that Monaco sort of wouldn't stand in the way of leaving if a suitable offer did arrive from the likes of the Tottenham.
Finally, Jonathan, just a quick word on Thierry Henry. He has resigned as the France under-21 boss. Why is that? Is there another move potentially on the cards?
Yeah, this one's a curious one because obviously he hasn't been in the position, or hadn't been in the position, for a terribly long time, although there was always a feeling that it was very much an appointment made for the Olympic Games, and he took the French team all the way to the final. They ended up as silver medalists, of course. There was speculation as well linking Henry with the USMNT, the US men's national team position. So that is something that has died off a little bit, obviously, since the Mauricio Pochettino taking that position has cropped up on the radar. So there is now a feeling that perhaps with his reputation at managerial level restored a little bit, that Henry could be perhaps looking at a return to the club game. But there was always a feeling, I think, that with Zinedine Zidane the obvious choice to replace Didier Deschamps at the head of the French national team after the 2026 World Cup cycle, that this was one for Henry to potentially get himself back into the managerial game and possibly put himself back on the market after the Olympics, which now seems to be the case.
Great stuff, very informative as ever. Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Eddie Nketiah nears Nottingham Forest move as Arsenal's summer sales surge beyond £70 million. Eddie Nketiah is on the verge of a move to Nottingham Forest, as Arsenal continues to excel in their summer transfer dealings. With less than 10 days remaining in the transfer window, the Gunners are far from done with their business. Having already secured Ricardo Calafiori and offloaded Emile Smith-Rowe, there's little indication that their activity will stop there. Arsenal's next target is Mikel Merino from Real Sociedad. The deal is nearing completion, but the club is keen to maintain a sustainable approach during this transfer window. This is where Eddie Nketiah's situation becomes particularly crucial. The 25-year-old hasn't started a competitive match for Arsenal in 2024 and was once again an unused substitute in the Gunners' 2-0 victory over Wolves on the opening day of the season. Although Mikel Arteta still values Nketiah as a member of the squad, there is an acceptance that he could depart for the right price. Several clubs have shown interest in the England international this summer. Marseille explored a deal, but their offer fell short of Arsenal's expectations. Bournemouth also expressed interest but opted to sign Brazilian striker Evanilson instead. Crystal Palace has maintained interest but has yet to formalise it. As of now, Nottingham Forest is leading the race to secure Nketiah's services. Forest's initial £25 million bid was rejected by Arsenal, who are holding out for closer to £30 million. A deal appears to be nearing completion, though Forest is also considering a move for Feyenoord's Santiago Jimenez, another player previously linked with Arsenal. However, there is confidence within the club that a deal with Forest for Nketiah is imminent. If Nketiah leaves, Arsenal's summer sales would surpass the £70 million mark. Smith Rowe's departure could fetch up to £34 million, while Mika Biratha's move to Sturm Graz is valued at up to £4 million, and Brooke Norton-Cuffy's transfer to Genoa could be worth up to £3.5 million. The club has also secured significant sell-on clauses for Omari Hutchinson and Mark McGuinness, with additional bonuses triggered by Bernd Leno's transfer to Fulham.